we are moved and compelled to come to the House floor to deal with the seemingly unending problem of police violence in America. Over the last year, we've seen a parade of horribles, examples of police violence caught on video for all of America to see. We're compelled to ask the question, what more does Congress need to see in order to understand that we've got a problem that requires Democrats and Republicans, people in the House and the Senate, working in partnership with the President to address? I certainly am of the view that the overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers are hardworking individuals who are there to protect and serve the community. But how can we continue to turn a blind eye to the fact that police violence all across America essentially has presented an epidemic of injustice that we've got to deal with in a free and democratic society? What more does the Congress need to see? We saw 12-year-old Tamir Rice gunned down by a police officer in what many view as a drive-by shooting. Tamir Rice didn't present any danger to the officer, who simply pulled up and really without warning shot him dead to the ground based on a call that had been made that someone seemed to have a toy gun. And then, of course, in New York City, Eric Garner was strangled to death with the use of a chokehold employed by a police officer, despite the fact that for the previous 20 years, chokeholds had been unauthorized as part of the policy of the NYPD. 11 different times, Eric Garner, a father of 6, said he couldn't breathe. And on 11 different occasions, the officers who were there failed to respond to Mr. Garner's pleas for help. And as a result, he was killed on a New York City street for all the world to see, and then a grand jury fails to indict, even on simple assault. And now, of course, we've got the tragedy of Walter Scott, someone who was killed running away from a police officer after having been tased. And it's not clear to me that if a courageous bystander hadn't captured that incident on video, the officer responsible for killing Walter Scott may be patrolling the streets of South Carolina today. What more does Congress need to see to realize that we've got a problem that needs to be addressed? And I'm thankful that several of my colleagues in government, beginning with the Assistant Democratic Leader, who's got a tremendous history of combating injustice before he got to Congress, and in his 2 decades plus in serving the people of South Carolina in Congress, let me now yield to the distinguished gentleman from the great state of South Carolina, Assistant Democratic Leader James Clyburn.
Mr. Speaker, I request permission to rise in this stance.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my friend, Mr. Jeffries, for yielding me a few moments here this evening. I visited with the family of Walter Scott. I attended his funeral, and not long after the services were over, I was approached by 2 women who identified themselves as mothers of two young men who had suffered unusual and unnecessary brutality at the hands of the officer who perpetrated the unnecessary shooting of Walter Scott. Both these women said to me that throughout the North Charleston community, there is significant apprehension as to whether or not they could accept or expect any kind of relief for the pain that they are suffering. I remained in Charleston over the weekend, and on Sunday evening, I saw that the mayor of North Charleston, Mayor Summey, the chief of police of North Charleston, Chief Jiggers, both along with the sheriff of Charleston County, attended the healing services that took place at Calvary Baptist Church there in Charleston. I applaud them, the mayor, the chief, and the sheriff, for responding to these three families, and there may be others, in a way that makes us all proud. I'm hopeful that after this weekend and some subsequent occurrences, the Congress would take a long, hard look at whether or not there's a role for us to play in responding to what seems to be an epidemic. I applaud those in the South Carolina legislature, most especially Senator Marlin Kempson, for his authorship of body camera legislation. And I thank the various newspapers, most recently this morning, the state newspaper, for endorsing this concept, saying that it's something that the legislature in South Carolina should authorize and fund. Now, there are a lot of departments, police departments, that are too small to raise the necessary funds. And a lot of them are so big until the cost might be prohibitive. And to that, I want to say, Mr. Jeffries, as I thank you and Congressman Scott and Congressman Richmond, as well as Congressman Gowdy, Schaefer, and Labrador for all the work you're doing trying to pull together a piece of comprehensive legislation that will reform our judicial and criminal system in a way that would make things much better going forward. Please, I ask, take a look at whether or not it's time for us here in the Congress to make the funds available so that all local police departments can afford to do something that I think will address a national problem. I also believe that the time has come for us to maybe mandate from this level the body cameras. I think Congresswoman Corinne Brown and Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver have both proposed legislation in this area. Let's take a look at their legislation. Hopefully your task force will take a look at their legislation and see whether or not we can incorporate that legislation authorization as well as the funding going forward. Now, I want to thank the Attorney General and the FBI Director for proposing that we deal with this issue of data collection. That's going to be very important as we take a look at these issues and these incidents and to see whether or not it's time for us to do something at the national level to deal with data collection. That, too, is an expense. And that is something these departments will have a problem with in terms of size, whether they're so big they can't afford it or too small to raise the funds. And maybe we can find a way to help fund the storage of this data so that we can create a better climate. Now, before I close, I want to say something that I get beaten up a lot for raising this issue, but I feel strongly about it. I'm not easily intimidated, and I refuse to be bullied. And so therefore, I want to say once again, whoever is funding the activities of the American Legislative Exchange Council, they are funding the kind of legislation, stand your ground, that creates vigilante activity in this country. It's clear that is what is flowing from that legislation. They're also funding legislation that is suppressing voters. And when you suppress voters, you are in fact ruining activity at the community level that I think is very, very important. They're also funding the bleaching and stacking of legislative and congressional districts, all of which I believe add to the creation of a venomous climate throughout our country. I started my professional career as a public school teacher, teaching history. I have studied the history of our great country, and I have taught it. And I can say that it is clear to me that a lot of the legislation that is being proposed today, a lot of the activities that we are experiencing today, we went through this before. And I would ask anybody who may be interested in the subject to just take a look at what occurred in this great country between 1872 and those new constitutions that went in place throughout the South in 1895. And you will see that through that 23-year period, same kind of vigilante activity, all done under the heading of Jim Crow laws. The same activity with a different label. It's what we are beginning to see today. And so I would hope that all the people here in this Congress and around the country will really take stock of who we are, where we are, and let's do what is necessary to move our country to common ground for all of its great citizenry. Thank you so much for allowing me a few moments, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I thank Assistant Leader Clyburn for his eloquent articulation both of the history of police violence and oppressive laws and statutes done under color of state law designed to undermine the constitutional principle of equal protection under the law, as well as for suggesting some of the things that we can consider doing to improve the situation. One of which would be to make sure that we capture police encounters on video in a manner that benefits all involved, so we can have a real understanding of what took place during the encounter. New York City has begun an experimental program placing body cameras in a few of the precincts throughout New York City, including the 75th precinct in the East New York community that I represent. And in talking to the commander of the precinct, the officers, while many were initially skeptical, eventually embrace the presence of body cameras for a variety of reasons, one of which is that it often diffuses an aggressive encounter, because the officers, upon approaching a situation, when they're wearing a body camera, are now required to say to the individual citizens they're confronting is that this confrontation or this exchange is going to be recorded. And what the officers have found is that in many instances that will diffuse a situation that otherwise might go in the other direction. And so body cameras are something that should be considered, and in fact, many law enforcement officers in departments across the country who have gone down this road have embraced it as technology that benefits the law enforcement community, in addition, of course, to making sure justice takes place when a police officer crosses the line. It's now my distinct privilege to yield a few moments to a new member of the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as the House of Representatives, who's already distinguished herself in terms of being a passionate advocate for justice and for progressive change in this country. That's the gentlelady from the Garden State, right next door to New York, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman.
Thank you very much to my esteemed colleague from New York. I am new to Congress, and I've had quite a few occasions to come to the floor and talk about issues that are very pressing to my community and to me. So I stand here as an African-American woman who represents the state of New Jersey, but I stand here as a wife, a mother, a sister, an aunt, and a cousin to African-American men. And in that capacity, each and every day that one of them leaves our presence and leaves their home, I wonder, will they come back safely? I know they mean no one any harm, but I don't know that the police that they might encounter would see that in them as I do. My community has cried out for a long period of time that there has been injustice and there has been harm and danger and needless deaths facing our young men and even some of our young women. As a matter of fact, Mr. Clyburn mentioned the issue of data collection as being such an important element here in helping us to find our way. And I would noted that the Washington Post said that out of thousands of fatal interactions between the police and citizens, only 54 officers have been charged. And of those, most were cleared and acquitted. So we need better data collection, we need greater accountability, and we obviously need greater justice. Because in those instances, the majority of these officers are going back into the streets, patrolling these communities, and those people who are in charge of them are still in charge of them and are still performing what should be a public service. I understand that not every case that we are encountering is as clear-cut as the one we just encountered with Officer Slager. I understand that there are other cases that have resulted in other findings. I don't understand how some of these findings could have occurred given the things that we've actually seen. One of the things that I stand here for is I recognize that this Congress can indeed help these local police departments with things such as body cameras. The cost-benefit analysis is a life worth enough to invest in these police departments. And I say yes, but there are other things that I think Congress should be considering and that I think we should be leading the way in the discussion. And one of those is that there are consequences that should not only be felt by the officer who is actively engaged in the misfortune, such as the Slager case, or even in the Brown case in Ferguson. But what about those individuals who knowingly participated in the policies that ended up creating this disparity in our society, this injustice in our society? They're given the opportunity to walk away. They're given the opportunity to retire. They're given the opportunity to resign. They're given the opportunity to move on with their lives and to benefit from the pensions and other benefits that are accrued by the number of years that they've been working as public servants, even though it is clearly demonstrated that their service was not to the public. There needs to be consequences that need to be addressed with regard to that also. There's a lot that needs to be done. We can see it, but we can no longer be silent on it. Congress does have a role here. Congress has a responsibility to ensure that the laws of this country are protecting all of our citizens. We need to do things like invest in body cameras, not just to catch those who are doing these things which are harmful to our community, but to protect the good policemen who are sometimes the subject of complaints that aren't verified. I honestly believe that those who don the blue uniform do so with the expectation and the desire to protect, preserve, and to serve. But those who do not, and those who allow those who do not to continue to do as they're doing need to be accountable. And I look forward to working with my colleagues, my esteemed colleague who is in charge of this special order hour, and all of those who are working to ensure that there is justice, safety, and security, and that as a mother, I don't have to worry. As a wife, I don't have to worry. As a sister and an aunt and a cousin and a friend, I don't have to worry every time a black man that is associated with me leaves my home. Thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from New Jersey for a very eloquent and passionate remarks. One of the things that we clearly have to grapple with in this country is the fact that the criminal justice system is broken. And there are many components to that. We've got a situation where far too often when a police officer crosses the line and engages in unlawful conduct, they're not held accountable for that conduct. What kind of incentive does that create for good conduct to take place moving forward if in the overwhelming majority of instances, such as the Eric Garner case, when a police officer crosses the line, a grand jury or a local prosecutor will often fail to hold them accountable? The other problem that we've got to address is overcriminalization in America, mass incarceration. If you look at some of these encounters that have taken place and that have gone wrong and that have resulted in tragedy, they often began with what was really overly aggressive, unnecessary policing strategy being deployed to tackle, at best, nuisance-like activity. Eric Garner is dead today because he was selling loose cigarettes, and someone at one police plaza gave the order to aggressively police this activity. Crime is down in New York, but there's still a couple hundred homicides committed every year. There's still some gang activity, still some assaults taking place, but we want to use police resources to aggressively go after someone who's selling loose, untaxed cigarettes. That's an overcriminalization problem connected to broken windows policing. Walter Scott is dead today because he had a broken taillight. 4 children are without a father because Walter Scott had a broken taillight. We've got to evaluate this overly aggressive policing strategy connected to the phenomenon of mass incarceration. And so I'm pleased to have had the opportunity in this Congress to work closely with someone who is one of the leaders in the House of Representatives and in the Capitol in dealing with our broken criminal justice system and working closely with colleagues on the other side of the aisle like Trey Gowdy and Jason Chaffetz and others who are interested in trying to figure out collectively how we can make America a fairer, more efficient place in terms of our criminal justice system. And so let me now yield to the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Louisiana who represents the wonderful city of New Orleans. We refer to him, of course, as the franchise because of his prolific baseball abilities, but he's also one of the most talented legislators here in the Capitol. I yield to my good friend, the Honorable Cedric Richmond.
Thank you, Representative Jeffries, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing us to address this most important issue. As we talk about it today, and members of the Congressional Black Caucus address this country and address this chamber, let me just start with this is not a black problem. It's not an African-American problem. It's not a Hispanic problem. It's not a minority problem. This is an American problem that's eroding the fabric and the core of who we are and what makes us exceptional. So as we talk about police violence, let me just start with, as we assess it, we try to figure out if we have a few bad apples or whether this is a systematic problem that needs to be addressed. I prefer to believe that it's the former, a few bad apples that need attention. And with that, I will say, and I will use an example, and Representative Jeffries, I'm sure you know, we had a police shooting in New Orleans airport a couple of weeks ago, where a man who was otherwise peaceful lacked medical attention and was paranoid and went to the airport intending to do harm. And in fact, he did do harm. But in the process, Officer or Lieutenant Heather Sylvie had no choice in this situation but to fire and discharge her firearm, and she killed Richard White. She had no choice, and she saved many lives. And I would like to believe that there are more Heather Sylvies out there than what we're seeing on the news every day. But the preponderance of what we see every day are shootings that are not justified. So when we talk about what can we do and we talk about how things affect, well, body cameras won't stop the event from happening. But like red light cameras and these automated traffic tickets, what they do is change behavior, because hopefully officers will realize that there's nothing done under the cloud of darkness anymore. That whether it's body cameras or civilians standing up and recording the interaction, whatever you do will be recorded to show an independent version of what's going on. And maybe, just maybe, that will change behavior and make officers just take notice that today is not yesterday, and you can't do the things that you used to do. Let me just say, as we address it, that one of the things we also can look at is the diversity of these police departments, the diversity of the FBI, the DEA, the ATF. Those departments and those police forces and those law enforcement organizations should reflect the diversity in their makeup of the great diversity that we have in this country. And U.S. attorneys in this country should stand and fight for civil rights violations just as they do the headline grabbing, public corruption, and all the other things that they focus on. So as we talk about this, and we have the new cases, but I have old cases in New Orleans. After Katrina, I had Henry Glover, who an officer on a second floor balcony shot him dead with an assault rifle, with a sniper rifle, saying that he posed an imminent threat to that officer on the second floor. And not only after he was shot and killed, the police took the body to a levee in an abandoned car and burned it. And if we get past Henry Glover, we can go to the Danziger Bridge, where officers engaged in a firefight with 6 civilians, of which today we learn all of which were unarmed and none of which fired on the police department. And 2 of those civilians were killed. So this is a very hard conversation to have. It's a conversation that we have to have, because the longer we ignore it, the longer it will fester. And I will tell you that the urban communities have been singing this song and have been reporting this for years and years and years. And it's not until new technology that we see that this was not a fabrication, but a concerned community watching their sons and their fathers killed by the hands of law enforcement. So I will say that we're part of the greatest body on earth, which is the United States Congress. And we can solve problems when we have the will, because my grandmother always said, where there's a will, there's a way. And it's time for Congress to dig up that will to make this country a more perfect union, because we all know that it's not perfect. It wasn't perfect when it was created, and it's not perfect today. But with the courage of legislators like Representative Jeffries from New York, Representative Johnson from Georgia, who will speak next, with the will of strong legislators who are not afraid to have an ugly conversation, we can wrap our hands around this and we can make our streets safe for everyone, because all lives do matter. And I think that it's time that both Republicans and Democrats and whites and blacks, we sit down and say that this is unacceptable, because the hate and the disgust and the hurt that is growing in African American and urban communities around this country is playing out to be justified. And the only thing that I can hope and pray, Representative Jeffries, is that we're bigger and that we're better than that as a country. So I look forward to working with you, and I look forward to working with this Congress to find solutions to these problems so that we don't have to bury another father or another son whose life was snatched from them simply by the hands of either an inexperienced officer, or worse than that, an officer that just had ill intentions. Because every day, good people put on that uniform, go out and risk their lives to make sure that our communities are safe, that our children get to and from school, that our husband and wives get to work and get home. They do that every day, risking their lives, and they sacrifice much so that we can be safe. And we need to make sure that we root out those bad apples, and we make sure that it doesn't happen to any more families. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I would yield back the balance of my time to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished gentleman from New Orleans for his thoughtful and eloquent exposition of the situation, and for pointing out that while this is not an easy conversation for us to have around the police use of excessive force, often resulting in the death of unarmed individuals such as Walter Scott and Eric Garner, it's not an easy conversation for us to have, but it's a necessary one if we're going to continue our march toward a more perfect union. I also would like to yield time now to another distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee who's taken an active role within the Congressional Black Caucus and beyond to introduce progressive pieces of legislation designed to address this problem. Let me now yield to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Representative Hank Johnson.
Thank you, my colleague, Congressman Jeffries from New York, for organizing this very important special order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, for hosting this. And we're here to talk about a very important subject, the extrajudicial killing of black males in America. It seems to be an epidemic, but it's really not. It's just simply the fact that we're hearing more about it. We're hearing more about the deaths that are occurring. We are seeing with our very eyes, looking at video, we are seeing that some of these killings appear to be unjustified. And when we understand that we're seeing what's been going on for a long time, but which has not been addressed, we understand that if we don't do something to address the problem, then these killings will continue. Now, why is it that we have what appear to be unjustified homicides of African American males at the hands of law enforcement repeated daily in the 108 days or so since the Michael Brown killing in Ferguson? We have heard of so many African American males losing their lives. It's very disturbing. Why is it that it continues to happen? Well, I would submit, Congressman Jeffries, that one of the reasons is because there seems to be two systems of justice involved, one for police officers and the other for civilians. It seems that there has been a reluctance to prosecute police officers when their actions go across the line. Now, you as well as I know that most of the law enforcement law enforcement officers out there, male and female, top to bottom, from the east to the west, are good people, honestly trying to do a good job. And their job is to protect and serve us. And a lot of times we make it very dangerous, and we make it very hard for them to do their job. But that is their job, to protect us and to serve us. And when one of us goes astray, when one of us runs away, that doesn't give a license to a police officer to pull out a gun and stop the individual, shooting them in the back. It's happened more than once. It's happened more than twice. It's happened frequently. Sometimes we don't hear about it because the person is injured and there is no video. Other times there's video and the person is killed and we find out about that and we see it. But I would submit to you that it happens far too regularly, and it happens without any penalty for misconduct. Now, I've said that most of our law enforcement officers are seeking to do the best job that they can be, but nobody's perfect, and they err sometimes, and when you err and you do it and you violate the criminal law, then you should be prosecuted yourself. So I want to take this opportunity to commend the officials in North Charleston who, in North Charlotte, North Carolina, who immediately when they saw the video, they saw the evidence, they didn't waste any time. They didn't try to cover up or hide. They went and did the right thing. They charged the officer just as they would have charged a civilian had a civilian shot someone, and it appeared to be unjustified. I'll give you an example in my state of Georgia, where on New Year's morning, 3 a.m. in the morning, one of our local police chiefs was asleep in the bed next to his companion, who happened to be his ex-wife, and due to some problems that he heard, he went and grabbed his service revolver, went downstairs to check on some noise, didn't find any disturbance, came back upstairs, put the gun, according to his testimony or his statement, on the bed, and then went to sleep with his wife beside him, his ex-wife, and he was awakened to a gun firing, and his ex-wife ended up being shot in the back, and he called the police to report that I've shot my wife. And he was not arrested. He has not been arrested to this day. Although about a month ago, the solicitor who handles misdemeanor cases, the prosecutor, the district attorney who handles felony cases, said that he intended to take the case to a grand jury to ask for a misdemeanor indictment against the officer. But there's two different systems of treatment, two systems of justice, one for the police, because if he had not been a police under those circumstances, he would have been arrested right there that same night, charged with a felony, and he would have been forced to, after being arrested, he'd had to get a lawyer to have to break the case down into something like a misdemeanor, if he was fortunate to have a good lawyer, if he could afford one. So when these kinds of things happen and people don't get charged, then it's a license for other officers to be reckless themselves. And so what we've had is a cascade of reckless behavior, which has resulted in people being killed and it being no penalty, and so it just continues. And so that's why it's important for Congress to take action. There are things that we can do here on a federal level, and Congressman Jeffries, I know that you've been working on some of these measures. I've been working on some too. I'll tell you, body cameras is a step in the right direction, and I will.
A very important point that I want to make sure is not lost. And then I certainly look forward to you articulating some of the things you've been working on in terms of legislative proposals. But most of us, most folks in America do believe that police officers generally are entitled to the benefit of the doubt in the context of a police encounter because of the inherent dangerousness of what law enforcement officers do. Certainly the former mayor of the city of New York famously said, in every case, this is Rudolph Giuliani, I'm going to give police officers the benefit of the doubt. But there's peril in the misapplication of that standard, because if it goes too far, as the gentleman points out, there are some who believe that even if I cross the line, there will be no accountability. And in this particular case, what was so chilling about the video after Walter Scott is gunned down is that this officer, not knowing that this entire encounter was covered on video, felt that he could drop something next to the body of Walter Scott, and presumably in his mind, that would be part of the narrative that he would use to get himself exonerated, because he understood that he would be entitled to the benefit of the doubt. And in the absence of video, in this particular case, could potentially have gotten away with murder. And so I thank the gentleman for raising that point. We've got to have a real conversation in America. Yes, the overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers are hardworking individuals dedicated to protecting and serving. But there's a problem with the misapplication of the benefit of the doubt standard in every instance. Because in the absence of video, you may allow some officers who've crossed the line to get away with being held accountable. And that's a terrible thing for justice and for encouraging proper behavior moving forward. I thank the distinguished gentleman for yielding.
And thank you for yielding back. I will also note, Congressman Jeffries, that in watching that video of the shooting in the back of the gentleman a week ago, what I saw was another police officer who arrived at the scene as the subject officer walked back, or actually ran or trotted back to the body, and as the video was slowed down in slow motion, you could see something coming out of his hand, landing next to the victim. And it's thought that the item that he picked up, that the video shows that he picked up, was a taser. And it appears that it was the taser that was then dropped beside the body of the victim, with the other officer looking at the scene as it unfolded. So I would think it's reasonable to assume that that officer, the first one to arrive at the scene, who happened to be an African American, it looked to me, apparently, I would think that it's reasonable to assume that he saw the officer deposit that item, which I believe to be the taser, beside the victim. And so what does that tell us? It tells us that there's a thin blue line over which law enforcement officers do not step. They protect each other. When they see wrongdoing, they do not call it out. They do not expose it. And so when that happens, Congressman, it impugns the character of all law enforcement. And if law enforcement is operating under that mentality that we see no evil, hear no evil, and certainly will not speak of it if we do hear or see it, that reinforces the systemic problems that we obviously have in law enforcement insofar as it relates to African American males. Our lives do matter, and it's important that if law enforcement officers as a group are to uphold the standards of their profession, that they must step across that blue line when they see something that another law enforcement officer does which is illegal or that is not within the bounds of propriety. They must police themselves.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will.
I thank Representative Johnson for raising a very important point. This is a difficult conversation. I understand it. It's not easy to have a conversation about law enforcement conduct that crosses the line into illegality. But we've got to ask the question, is there a blue wall of silence that exists such that good officers who observe inappropriate conduct engaged in by bad officers are afraid to speak the truth about encounters that take place that cross the line? And if in fact there is this blue wall of silence, I ask the question, how can that be good for our democracy? When it means that a victim of police violence in most instances will never get equal protection under the law consistent with the 14th Amendment because of this almost impenetrable blue wall of silence. As we have this conversation about what we're going to do about police violence, and it should be a Democratic conversation and a Republican conversation, a black, a white, a Latino, and an Asian conversation, a blue state conversation. It happened in New York. A red state conversation. It happened in South Carolina. This is an American problem. And so I thank the distinguished gentleman, I'll yield back, for raising this issue. It's a difficult one, but we weren't sent here to the United States Congress to run away from difficult issues. When it's impacting the people we represent, we've got to run toward difficult issues and try to confront them. I yield back.
Thank you. That thin blue line or that blue wall of silence, it's not a good thing for our democracy. It's not a good thing for freedom, because the truth is that when one's freedom is taken away, then it affects potentially all of us in having our freedoms taken away. And so the truth is that all Americans are at risk when bad actors in law enforcement are allowed to act badly with impunity. All Americans are at risk. And I will also, and I know that Congressman Jeffries, you represent New York, and I know that when the two officers were lost their lives at the hand of a bad guy who ambushed and killed two innocent police officers in New York, and thousands of police officers came to the funeral to see off their fallen brothers, as they should do. And many other Americans watched on TV. And I was quite frankly disturbed, greatly disturbed, when the police officers, some of the New York officers, turned their backs on the civilian head of the city of New York. They turned their backs to the mayor as he was speaking at the funeral, a sign of disrespect for civilian authority. That attitude contributes to the thinking of some law enforcement officers that it's okay, that whatever they do is acceptable. And so the police organizations must come to grips with the fact that they have a responsibility to do the right thing when one of their own does the wrong thing. They have a responsibility to do so. And so I know that many officers, many police departments don't pay their officers very well. Civil servants in general are not paid commensurate with the value of their services to the people that they are serving. And police are no different than that. And police officers have the same concerns that we have, that civilians have. Sometimes they have problems at home with their wives. They have problems with their children. They have bills to pay. They might be a little bit behind. They have a lot of pressure. And so I think we should do a little more in the area of mental health evaluation and counseling and help for our officers. We should encourage them to come forward if they are hurting, it should be a part of the culture of law enforcement that you're not too big and not too powerful to be able to ask for the help that you need. And our society should be willing to give them that help, and we should be willing to pay for it as well. And so this is not, this issue of black males being killed by police officers is not a simple. There are no simple solutions. There are a number of solutions that can help make this situation better, and that's why we in Congress and others in state legislatures and city councils and county commissions should be discussing this issue. We should be trying to do what is necessary to break down the systemic problems that have led to this result, and to do something about those problems, to get those problems alleviated and eventually eliminated. And so I'm so happy that you have seen, Congressman Jeffries, you've seen the need for this to be a topic of discussion, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity to come here and to participate in this discussion with you. And I let you know that I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you as we do what we know that we need to do in order for Congress to address this issue.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia for his continued leadership and involvement in this issue and trying to bring about resolution. And as we prepare to close, let me again make clear that in my view and the view of, I believe, many throughout this body and across the country, we know that police officers, the overwhelming majority of law enforcement officials, go to work every day trying to do the right thing. It's a difficult job. But because you have the capacity to take a life, we've got to make sure that when you exercise deadly force, that it's deployed only in circumstances where it's absolutely necessary, not a chokehold resulting in the strangulation of someone who was selling untaxed cigarettes, who pleads for his life 11 times and is killed on video for all of his 6 children to see. We don't want to see deadly force used when someone who has been tased is running away. Supreme Court said in 1985, you can't use deadly force to stop a fleeing felon. Walter Scott wasn't even a felon. You stopped him because he had a broken tail light. We just want to make sure that in America, there's a balance between effective law enforcement on the one hand and a healthy respect for the Constitution and for civil rights and for equal protection under the law for everyone on the other. And that is our objective. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that the House adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for morning hour debate.